Get started. I always try to keep things on time. So this is our webinar for November. Welcome everyone. Woo! Can't believe it's already the 18th. So thank you to everybody for attending, and we're gonna record this webinar so we can then post it to the project website. So if there are people you knew who wanted to be here but couldn't because of conflicts, then let them know that we'll be posting the recording. Okay, so I'm going to turn the hosting over to Greg Ostick, so he can get us rolling. All right, go for it, Greg.
Cool. All right, thanks. Yeah, let me share my screen. We're just gonna walk through the project and then some of the questions that were prompted in the description. Hopefully we have a good discussion about it. Let me know if this works. Can you see that?
I can see the slides. Yep.
Cool. Good. So yeah, I'm trying to see who's here. So so just before I start, Dan Taravis, who's my partner at RSI, he did the first part of this presentation at your event. So I shortened that up and then added more stuff since we've done that. But I wanted to see who was here to see who had been to that or heard some of the background. So I think I'm going to keep that pretty short. But if there's areas where you're just like, there's only 8 of us here. So if there's areas where people have questions, stop me. You will need to literally interrupt me, which is completely fine. And, ask questions and I can expand on those sections. Not a big deal. So, cool. Well, I'll just get going then. So, yeah, I'm Greg from RSI. We're a small company whose goal is to support communities who want to do community-driven research. We work a lot in agriculture. We work with a bunch of different organizations I'll talk about in a second. But here we're going to talk about the project that we're doing, NAPDC supported us on, which is doing a needs assessment and gap analysis for open source tools among certain types of organizations. And I'm going to talk about those in a second. But basically that's it, like a needs assessment, a gap analysis. So that's just about us, who we are. We work with a bunch of different groups. We've worked a lot with Open Team and the Open Team community through a variety of projects. We've developed a couple of pieces of software in trying to support community-driven research. We feel like that fill in the gaps that existing commercial software, usually closed source software, don't fill. And that's SurveyStack, which is a survey tool for community knowledge building, and then SoilStack, which is a soil sampling and stratification service. So currently we're also working with the USDA and have done a lot of needs assessments with them. Juliet, actually, who's on the call, has done those along with Amber, which has been really fascinating because the USDA is an organization that works with lots and lots of farmers, and that's what we're going to talk about today, organizations that work with farmers and collect farm level data. So they're kind of like the big dog in the room on that front. And then covers that up. And then we've also run projects ourselves. So I think we're a little bit unique in that sense. We ran this project for the Bionutrient Institute where we had we developed not only sampling methodologies, but lab methodologies for measurement of nutritional content in 15 different products, and then collected a couple 10,000 samples from 40 states across the US over the course of 4 years and built the data system for that, managed the whole project start to finish, and then delivered the results in the form of reports. So yeah, we're not just clickety-clicking on keyboards. We've done a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. So in the context of this, we basically have 3 parts. So our goal was to work with a group of organizations, which I'll show you in a second, who collect data directly from farms and then do stuff with that data. So it's not the farmers themselves, it's groups working with farms. And it was to ask the question, what tools are you using today? what are open source alternatives to those tools for your information stack or your technology stack? What's the gap? And then how can you bridge that gap? Like why? And it's a question to us, like people here who are in the community of creating open standards or open source tools. Oftentimes we just ask this question, like, how come people aren't using our stuff, right? It's like, how come someone's using my fill in the blank thing? And we're really trying to get all the way down to the bottom of the haystack and like, get to the answer to that question, one technology and one organization at a time. Yeah, the motivation is fairly obvious. We think open source is the right answer. We want to figure out how to make it work. And then also this middle one is I actually think, and I hope people start to recognize this more. I think you guys in Nebraska and probably you, Stuart, also, and others in the Midwest understand this better. But I think that there's a broad failure to understand that the culture of open source and the culture of ag, which is really the culture of like the rural United States, at least for us, they don't use the same language, but they have all the same ideas. And the more we can connect those ideas, the right to repair, participant widget, yes, this thingy. Oh, there we go, got it. So the more we can connect language, like you should have control over your own tools. You should have the right to repair your stuff, right? You should be involved in influencing the design of the things that you use. Rural independence, the sort of like anti-tech, almost Luddite bias, which is funny because even though we're providing tech, a lot of it is really isn't necessarily ultra mega tech. So I just think I hope people start to make that connection more. And if someone wants to chime in and interrupt and give an example, I'd love to hear it because it's something I'm trying to push. The values that we're trying to bring. So when we say, oh, we're trying to bridge this gap, what are we talking about, right? What's the gap? And what are the things that we feel like we should be offering? So we should be finding and offering solutions and tools that are fair. And that's a data standard, data concept, that are farmer respecting and that are open source. So those are the things when we look like what are alternatives, that's what we're looking for. Almost nothing is perfect across those values, and you just pick the best things you can find. So these are, finally, now we get down to like the organizations that we worked with. PASA is Pennsylvania Sustainable Ag. They actually do a whole bunch of different things, which is true for a lot of these organizations. We mostly worked with them on their soil benchmarking study. They work with a couple hundred, and in the future, they want to do up to like 500-600 farms where either the farmer or PASA themselves come out, collect soil samples, and then they benchmark soil metrics, and they provide that information back to farms. FiberShed works to connect farms and farm information to brand requirements, and they bridge the gap between the two. What does the brand want? What is the farm doing? How can they prove they're doing it? That will achieve them a higher price. So that's what FiberShed is doing, specifically around fiber, so cotton and animals, wool and stuff. MadAg is a consulting company focused on regenerative transition, so they'll support farms interested in regenerative, both on like the funding end, but the projects end and all kinds of other things as well. Open Team, probably most of you know, is interested in connecting the technology development layer with the user layer so that sort of more effective co-development of technologies can happen. Sorry, you're covering half my screen. CAF is a California-based group that supports farms in a bunch of different ways, directly with just tech support, but then also with program support, getting people involved in different programs, everything from regulatory compliance all the way up to like grant making and things. And then Momentum Ag's works with, so sort of one-man operation now, but works with farms to sort of design and learn and share on-farm trials. A little bit like Practical Farmers of Iowa, but not just in Iowa. Really cool. A lot of stuff on cover crops specifically. That's what he's really interested in. So all these groups work with multiple farms, like I said, and they have kind of similar needs. And so if I were to bucket their needs, I would put it in three basic categories. And you often see this. And I could make a whole nother list of organizations who are like this too. So I think you can view this as a market. If you're on the business end and you're trying to like, I want to build a tool, like this is a market, organizations like this. On one end of the things that these people do, they give program access to producers, right? Like I said, regulatory compliance, looking for funding, low-cost loans and grants, government programs like conservation, that conservation districts and other things might do. Farm planning, similar to soil, like a conservation planner, but sometimes unrelated to that, regenerative planning, carbon planning, all kinds of stuff. And then research, like I said, with the benchmarking study, or more often, you'll see that with organizations like this that come out of universities that are explicitly trying to do research. And of course, all these things need data from individual farms, and they need to aggregate that data up, and then they need to do something with that data, right, and deliver it to someone. So we did 3 things, and we're on the 3rd of these right now. So I'm going to show you the first couple. And because Dan went through the general stuff, I'm just going to like dive right in and show you like the details, and hopefully that's interesting and not overwhelming, but yeah, we'll see. So first we started with a needs assessment. If you haven't done that before, it's super important. And a needs assessment is really just your job in a needs assessment is to empathize with whoever you're talking to. It's like, I'm sure if you guys have been in partnerships or married, right, you've had the conversation of like, don't solutionize. I just want you to like listen to what I say. Like that is your step 1 in the needs assessment. Like don't solutionize, just shut up and listen to what I say. And I'm just going to show you how we did it basically. And you can do it different ways. One second, I actually didn't pull this up. Oops. And you'll find people do this different ways, and that's totally fine. But I do kind of want to wrap this up when we get done with this and like provide some templates for this process, because it is useful to have those templates. So I'm going to show you a needs assessment for one of the groups. I'm just going to use Momentum because I asked him ahead of time. And I'll show you what we did. So this whole thing took 2 meetings, about like 3 hours, 3.5 hours. And we first sat down, this is with Lincoln, and we said, okay, Lincoln, like, I wanted to be really transparent, like, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is what my needs are, because I don't want him confused about why I'm doing this. It's like, I have reporting, and I have a project I have to do. And now I want you to tell me what your goals are. So he laid out some goals initially, but actually we came back to this at the end of the needs assessment, and he gave a much clearer perspective on what his goals were. But I think regardless, it's really important to like get exact goals from people, because otherwise you don't know if you completed or failed, if they got what they wanted out of it. So that was 1. 2, this is where the like empathy, just shut up and listen part comes in. I first learned a lot of this stuff from Ankita at Purdue, and I was all like stressed because people were saying they wanted this and they wanted that. I'm like, oh, now we have to do this and that. She's like, no, you don't have to do any of this. You're just listening. This is not all one-to-one relationships here. Just shut up and listen. So that's what you should do first. You should just be like, hey, like, tell me about your organization. Like, how does it work? What problems do you have? Like, you don't have to be that specific. And just start taking notes. And what you'll find is you're gonna like start on the side doing your process flows and roles and user journeys, because you're going to hear it come out, but you're not going to force them into that explicit language, which is what you want. Like, just let them say whatever they're going to say. If they're like, you know what I really love? I love this thing. Be like, could you screenshot that real quick? Like, I would love to see that too. Stick it in here. So step 1, just listen, take notes. If you're working on your other stuff on the side, great, but let them say what they're going to say. This is actually the most important information that you get. Step 2, I like to do like event flow mapping next, which is how exactly, let's pick the part of your process you want to work on, because sometimes these groups have, 70 people in their organization. You're not going to do the whole thing. It's like, okay, we're going to focus on this piece. Tell me exactly how it works. These ones are really simple. They're usually way more complicated. But it's like, well, first we have conversations, with the farm, and then, but also we text a bunch, and sometimes we email, and then I put some of that into base row, but then some of it I actually summarize in slides, because everyone just like knows PowerPoint, and I give that to the farmer and they're like, yeah, that looks okay. And We have a tacit agreement that that's okay to be public, but I've actually never formalized that agreement. So it's usually okay, but this is all personal relationships, and I know Bob and I know everything about his daughter anyway, so it's all fine. So this is Lincoln's experience, right? You're just listening and he's like telling you all the things. He's like, but the soil tests don't get in there. Here's why, la, 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 la. So you need like event flow mapping is like what, who does what, and then what happens, just over and over and over and over again. It can be really long, and that's fine. And then ask, where are the pain points? If you want just to keep it ultra simple, there's a whole methodology for this, but to keep it simple, just like, where are the pain points? And put red stickies where there's pain points. So I did kind of that over here, where I kind of generalized this out. Put red stickies, because that's what you're going to focus on. You're going to come back and say, I heard you say you didn't like this. I heard you say you didn't like that. So do your process flow mapping. And then this one, usually when you get to here, it feels a little overkill, but it's not. It's really important, like user journey mapping. And that includes like defining the roles, which honestly is, in my opinion, even more important than the user journeys, is just knowing the roles. Because you can get through 2.5 hours of them telling you everything about everything. And then you get to here, you go, tell me the roles. And they're like, well, there's, Bob. And it's like, I didn't even hear about Bob. Who's Bob? It's like, well, Bob's the TAP. I'm like, I don't even know what a TAP is. And they're like, well, the TAP is like the most important person in this whole thing. You're like, they haven't come up yet. So, get the roles. You don't know who they are. And write down their goals, what do they do? What do they do? Because then you're going to take these roles over here into user journey maps, and you're going to do this process, pick a role. And I do it with them. I just let them do this. I'm like, answer these questions. Say, I need to do a thing so I can have a thing, right, that relates to my purpose, my role. And then I add some notes to it. And they do this all by themselves, which is great. And then we walk through it together so I can better understand. And this is really helpful. And oftentimes pain points will come out of this too, even ones that didn't come out of the event flow or their general conversation. And then I add other notes, other things here, but this is the basic process. So that's like a needs assessment start to finish. I thought this was, personally, I've done this like in different ways, but this is the first time it forced me to really like do everything in an order and be consistent, repeatable. And I felt like this was effective. And if you've never done it before and you want a starting point, this is a good starting point. I'm happy to share this Miro board. Yeah, I'll keep rolling. If you have questions, interrupt, or we can do questions at the end, because I know that was the whole kind of thing.
Have you looked at distilling this down into a value proposition canvas?
No, that would be a great next step though. That would be interesting. If you have like a methodology for that or a process, that would be great. Yeah.
It just some of the stuff that you were walking through and pointing out just resonated with in my head with that concept, because that's how I've seen some of this material expressed before, right? Especially the pain points and the pain relievers and the goals and the needs. So
yeah, I think honestly, there's a lot of good ways to do this. This is just like one way, but they all have some of the overlapping concepts, like you said. I think probably the thing that I learned most, that was most important, was actually this part, just like shut up and listen, because I didn't used to do that, and it ended up being confusing for people. But yeah, everything else, I think you can do a lot of different ways. I'll show you what we did next, actually, and I'm curious if this links to anything else you've seen or have some suggestions on. So next, oops. Oh yeah, these are hidden slides. Okay, so then we did this solution identification. So everybody went back. We took all their Miro boards, like read through them all, and then we did this, which I thought was neat, and maybe people would find this interesting. We created base row is like Airtable. It's just open source Airtable, and we started mapping everything out. So we listed all the partners and their notes on who they were. Kind of the type that I showed before is like they focus on program access, they focus on research, whatever. We listed the stakeholders, and those were the roles, the individual roles that they talked about and who that was related to. And then we listed the needs, and this required a lot of synthesis because needs weren't always referenced in the same way, they weren't always said in the same way, but a lot of times they were similar. So like some people really needed diverse like input fields, whereas some people were always inputting the same thing over and over. And a good example is like if you're CAF and you have 21 different programs that farmers can run through and they're changing every other year, you need a tech system that can handle super diverse, constantly changing data input fields. Because it's, so putting in a year's worth of development effort to make one user entry flow shiny and fancy, not worth it for you. That does not make sense for you. So anyway, lessons like that. So we listed all these needs, we connected it to which partners needed it, and then we sort of kind of did a high level prioritization based on like how many partners needed this, how priority did they think it was, and then what should we focus on. So we pulled out a couple that we felt like, okay, these seem like we're seeing it across a lot of groups, and then we tried to do some like proposals out of that. And none of this is way more art than science, because you can have a need that only one or two groups have, but you could have a fix that's super easy, low effort, right? So it's worth like proposing. Then you can have something that everybody has, but it's like almost impossible to fix. So you may not want to bring it to the table. But so we linked together a bunch of proposals and detailed them all out, connected them which gaps were fixed and blah, blah, blah. And that's how we ended up getting to these proposals that we felt like were validated based on what we were seeing in the group. I really like this. I am definitely going to use this structure again. And I think it's repeatable, and it helped us. It's mostly a tool for us to figure out what to focus on and propose. So we then took this back to folks and we had a meeting all together. And this was just like basically we were going to present these solutions back. But actually, more importantly, we realized in the process that most important thing for these people is actually they wanted to connect with each other. And that was so obvious because everyone's like solving the same problems. I mean, you've all seen it, right? Like everyone's solving the same problems. They don't know each other exists. Or somebody solved one problem, the other person doesn't know, whatever. So I was like, you all need to call each other. So some of them did, that was good. And then we got together and then just really like further help them understand that, again, like empathy, like you're not alone, CAF, that like FiberFed has the same problems as you, and here's what it is, blah, blah, blah. And so I did some neat, I think, interesting little techniques that was fun for this. Like in this case, everyone had basically the same workflow, like data workflow, like intake producer, then you do a needs assessment to see what programs they're part of, and you do some planning support, data collection, verification, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, okay, put a dot for your organization next to which parts you do. So again, that helped people understand what they do, what they don't do, what other people do. That was cool. This one is sort of just some dichotomies that were apparent that really made a difference from a tech development perspective. Some people, like Momentum is a good example. They only did one thing. Like he does like on-farm trial support. That's what he does. So when you're thinking like, oh, how do you develop technology for him? It's very linear. It's very straightforward. There's not 1,000 options. It's like, this is what I do. Some people like CAF have 21 different programs. It's like, well, their technology solution is going to look different, right, than this guy. Same with this. Some people have workflows that they've had for 10 years with historical information and everyone's trained on, blah, blah, blah. Some people are just developing a workflow now. Your ability to engage and offer tech solutions is going to be different. And then finally, like farm record detail. If you're working down at the level of farm records, like an irrigation event on a day with stuff, you will need a different system than people are just like, I need to know whether you till ever, So this is helpful. So this just kind of, it like helped them position themselves in the space. And then we went through and I listed out the solutions that we came up with and just like very simply said, describe the solution, had a little conversation, and then said like, what do you want to do? Do you want us to investigate this? Do you want us to do a proof of concept on it? Or you're just like, damn it, like I've wanted this for 10 years. It's like, go do it. So, so we went through several of these and 2 of them like clearly had more interest than the others, which was cool because it connected with what we saw in the needs assessments. One was this multi-farm FarmOS instance. So people can manage farm level record keeping data across many, many farms, like hundreds of farms in one nice, pretty FarmOS instance. That made sense to a lot of people. It was a simpler design than they had now. They had no way, a lot of people didn't have any way to do it. I didn't show you all the tools that people use now, but very common tool is things like Salesforce, Pipedrive, general purpose, like tools like that. And honestly, people are not super happy with them, but they do serve a lot of farmer onboarding needs. But what they don't do is handle farm management data, like the detailed stuff. And so this is where people were falling down. So this is one thing that we're actively investigating now and like putting effort in, because we do have funding through NAPDC. Half of our funding is towards like gap filling. So we're going to try to fill this gap. And then the other one, which you'll all think is fun, because everyone thinks this is fun, is AI assisted like intake. So, and this is like one of the issues everybody has, of course, everywhere, all the time, is the cost and effort involved in getting information to the system, especially in ag. No one wants to take the time to tell you what they're doing. All the systems are different, so you can't really automatically pull it in. You all know. And so in the case of these folks, the question, there was a very frequent situation where someone, let's call them a technical assistance provider, goes to a farm, spends 2 hours, maybe they're collecting soil samples and talking with the farmer about their yearly farm records. Maybe they're talking about the experiment that they're designing in the case of Momentum, like but they're having a conversation. Then that person gets back in their truck and drives home. And whoever is in charge wants them to write down all kinds of stuff into the database, right? It's like a police report. It's like the police love like walking around the street and catching baddies, but then they got to spend 5 hours when they get back writing the report, right? And so there's clearly a need. What they would like is for either to record the conversation with the farm to a certain extent, or maybe the emails or other interactions, and automatically populate that database. Or when the TA gets back in her truck, she just like just yaks for 5 minutes about what she just heard, because it's all fresh in her mind, right? And then that populates the database. So definitely interest in that across the board. And so we're actively working on that. Yeah, so whoops. So then I'll just show you those, just like 1 or 2 of those things, because I think it's interesting. So we have been evaluating the AI stuff, and we're doing this in stages. Like we're going to spend $8,000 to do an initial piece, and we're going to come back to you guys and say, like, what do you think? You know, like, we got this far. Do you want us to keep pursuing this? Like, is this worth it? So in the case of the unstructured AI, we set up a space on Hugging Face. So Hugging Face is a place that you can like run models and then create kind of like model workflows, because AI, as much as we'd like to think it's magical, it's just like programming, but weirder. And so what we've done is we've actually, again, in here, we made this. The hard part about this is taking unstructured data and then figuring out how successful it can be becoming structured in a whole range of situations, right? So what we did is we set up this base where we have we call recipes, which are basically like a think of it as like all the pieces that you need to have in place to be able to run like an AI workflow. So this recipe 2 uses GPT-4o. This is very specific, but like it has a moderate pedantic class structure. It includes initial prompting. It does not have error handling. It does not have base validation, data validation, active data validation, blah, blah, blah. So we identified, think of these as like levers, or as like what you put into the mix, you know, are you using this model or that model, or using prompts, not prompts, you know, how many prompts, are you chaining them together, all that stuff. So we came up with a bunch of these and a bunch of recipes. And now we're just generating data. We tried to generate, I can see now why everyone wants synthetic data from AI, because you can talk to all the partners, be like, send us all your data. Examples, and they send you 1 or 2 examples, but they're like messed up and it doesn't really work. And you're just like, this is not going to work. So we're basically just making up data, which sounds like bad, but actually it's much, you're just going to get better results out of it, honestly. So I interviewed my partner about her carrot variety trials, and I interviewed my brother about his trials on the farm. Very different types of farms, very different. And that's what we want. We want all the variety, so that as we run these through our different recipes, we see what passes, we see what fails, we see why, we can switch things around. So anyway, this is what we're doing. And now we have this, sorry, I started the wrong thing, but now that we have all this information and the structure, we know what we're trying to do, we set it up in Hugging Face, where, you know, we then sort of have those flippers about how you're going to run the model, all integrated. So like, please enter your input data, like, I'm a producer who met with Steve about a irrigation pilot experiment. This is probably going to be terrible, but we'll try it. We're going to use GPT-4o. Yeah, I don't remember. I probably can't do that right now because I actually don't know the details of this as much as other people. Do you have a specific pre-processing style in mind? No. So these are all the prompts, right, that may improve the quality of the output or not. Blah, 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 blah. And then when you run it all the way through, you end up being able to see, in our case, JSON schema, and you see if it's populated and if it worked. And I'm sorry, I should have actually prepped this all before, but that's what happens at the end. You press the button and you get a filled out database, is the short of it. And you're like, oh, that was terrible. And you totally failed AI, or you're like, oh, good job. You were successful. And maybe this is a good process. So, so yeah. And then the multi-farm OS, I sort of already described it, but this is what Farm OS looks like. So we need to make this so that it's not just looking at one farm, but it's looking at many farms, and you like maybe have a drop down up here and all that kind of stuff. So we've just started in that. We have the developer kind of lined up. And the last thing I want to show is like the broader question that I will jump to here is like, can we use this as a strategy for supporting open ag tech? And I want to argue that like, I think we can, like, and you know, this group was with this particular, or this work was with this particular group of organizations that I showed you, but we've actually done this before with a series of other organizations, some of which were farms. We did the same kind of a needs assessment. We pulled together the common needs and some proposals. We went back to them and they said, yeah, I would support that. I would support this. I would support that. So we knew who wanted what. We laid out the proposals, which is these. We had a JD Ops integration for Farm OS. We had inventory and products enhancements. This is all for Farm OS, but and then we went back to them and said, hey, 3 people, we think this is going to cost $10,000. 3 people said they were interested. Divide it by 3. Are you willing to put in $3,300? And most of the time they said yes, because we prompted them. We're like, this is what this is for. You know, you're going to have control over your technology development. Yeah, it costs money, but like also you're getting what you want. And this worked. What didn't work is we didn't deliver on time, to be perfectly honest. And that was frustrating. It was understandable. It's nobody's fault, and it happens sometimes. But what worked was getting people on board. So, so yeah, the question I want to propose in conversation to have is why don't we do this more? And how do we engage groups like this to make this the norm? How do we make it the norm for people to sort of control their own technology futures? And I know that, you know, and how do we engage people in a way that respects their time and respects their knowledge? It's really critical. And then what are the pitfalls? So yeah, that's the end. That's my contact information. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, Greg, from my perspective, I think this way of doing it makes a lot of sense, right? If you step back logically, you go, yeah, this is totally the way that we should be doing this, right? We should be sitting down with groups who have pain points and needs and who could really use some help, and just let them talk through this process, and then
Mhm.
provide some structure for them, and then come back with, okay, here are the gaps that we think we can fill, and this is what it will take. And, kind of collaboratively, God, if I could only speak on a Monday, collaboratively put together a plan, right? And I think that one of the reasons that it's not done this way is, I can think of two reasons. Like, one is that um a lot of people don't have the skills to do this, right? They're not accustomed to having these kind of conversations where you just sit
Yeah.
down and actually listen, right?
Yeah.
And so it can kind of be uncomfortable. And you're like, oh, I don't, and then the second part is people will go, oh, I don't have time for that.
Right.
It's like, okay, do you want your problem solved or not?
Right.
Well, I do, right? But then, like, can't you just give me the solution? It's like, no, I can't give you the solution until I actually understand the problem, right? And that's I'm
Exactly.
sorry, but that's you, right? And
Right. Right.
I've been in that situation so many times where, like, you go to talk to someone and they're like, oh yeah, we definitely need you to work on this. That would be so great. Okay, like, let's set up a meeting. And then you contact them. You're like, okay, let's go sit down and let's work through this. And then
Right.
they go, oh, I don't have time for that. I'll just send you my student. I'm like, no, dude, I can't talk to your student. No, I actually need to talk to you directly,
You know,
right? Because
yes.
you're the one who has the perspective that's needed to
Right.
actually solve this problem, right? And then they're like, I'm like, dude, look, if I could put on the Swami hat, right? And do the Tonight Show thing, the Johnny Carson with the Swami hat, and just, figure out what your problems are for you, I would gladly
Right.
do it. But no, I can't, so there's
That's not
that.
gonna work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's, getting people to recognize, like, trust me, this will actually have value. Like, not only will it help us to address your problems, but it is actually going to help you better understand exactly what is the problem that
Right.
you're experiencing, right? You
Well,
might think you
and
know what it is, but I will bet that you haven't actually sat and thought it through, right?
yeah, and that's again, that's that initial conversation or their willingness to engage. Like, that's
Mhm.
why I think connecting open source developer culture and rural culture is so critical, because once you're not, you know how it is. If a friend calls you at 6 o'clock on Friday, you pick up the phone and you talk to them. If, like,
Mhm.
someone trying to sell you something calls, like, you're not going, or a partner or a
Uh-huh.
business or whatever, right? It's a different thing. And I think that cultural connection really matters because people feel like they're part of something. Also, people are really unhappy with, like, ag tech, largely speaking. Like,
Yes.
you
Mhm.
only have to just give an alternative that's compelling. And people are
Yes.
like, hell yeah, like, I'm tired of these
That's
a-holes.
right. That's right.
They're
Yeah,
like,
they are very unhappy with it. And
they're
I
unhappy
think
with
part of
it.
that was what you're saying with, I was thinking about your comment about the parallels between kind of like the rural farming community culture and the open science and open source culture. And I think you are right that there are a lot of parallels. And part of it is, I think, that rural and farming communities, um, they are thinking, often they're thinking longer term, right? They tend to be a little
Mm,
bit more conservative, but they also tend to have a longer term view of things. They really appreciate, because of that, that they tend to be fairly risk averse, and they
right.
appreciate just straight talk, right?
Yeah.
And I think the open source, open science community shares a lot of that perspective, right? That they want things to be as presented, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly, right? It's like,
Right.
many times I'll show stuff and I'll be like, yeah, okay, I'm showing you the source for this, or I'm describing this in this detail, not because I want to bore you, but because I want you to have a good understanding of what this thing does and what it doesn't do.
Yeah.
And that, you know, yeah, it is not a one size fit all, and it is not going to, you know, like be magic, right? And I think they appreciate that. And I think the open source, open science community also appreciates that, right? That there's not the, wow, you know, this is like the OxyClean of your data problems. You just throw it into your software, right? And just magically everything comes out all nice and beautiful.
Right.
And it will also, you know, like, and if you buy now, you know, it'll come with a set of Ginsu knives. I mean,
Right.
that's not the culture, right? The culture is much
Right.
more just give me something that I think is going to work. I know it's not going to be perfect. I know that there's going to be issues, right? But we're accustomed to solving problems and challenges, right? That, okay, yeah, it's not going to solve everything, but that's okay. It will get us this far forward. And you know, and they appreciate that, just the honesty and also just the person to person negotiations, right? I think that's very much a rural farm culture, and also an open science, open source community thing. Like, hey,
Yeah.
we would love to work together. Let's just all get together, have this conversation. We'll come to consensus and go forward, right? Which is,
Right.
I think, very much shared between those communities.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
value.
I think we could learn
Yeah.
a lot from other people who have long-term relationships and partnerships with farms, like, you know, agronomists or, you know, other chemical seed salespeople tend to have longer relationships, not everyone, not all the time, but the ones that work
Yeah.
well. There's a lot of those. And so I think, you know, yeah, all the things that you said, having a long-term view, being honest and straightforward, solving practical problems, just building a relationship where you're just talking about, you know, how your kids are and all that kind of stuff. It's all
Oh,
the normal
yeah.
stuff. And if we do that
Yeah.
well, then I think the potential is there to kind of rinse and repeat this and grow. But I struggle to look outside of this, how we effectively grow in a way that's actually user driven, customer driven, producer driven, market driven. This is the way I would like to grow, because it feels right. So, but yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, but it is a challenge, right? It's that, you know, if I'm in a smaller community and I go to, you know, see my physician or something, they will likely spend more time just talking, right? Just kind of, how are things, right? Generally discussing. Where I've lived in like very large cities where that is not the model, right? And that's also not the expectation, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to get to go in there. I'm going to get my 10 minutes. I better get whatever my problem is out on the table, like right away. Like, hey, I'm glad you're here. Okay, chop, 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 chop. And then I'm out, right? And that's not the model, I think, in this space. So you have to kind of think about, yeah, all right, if I want to make this sustainable and I want to be a provider of solutions, then I can take different approaches, right? I could take the approach of, I'm going to spend 5 minutes with each customer, and that's it. That's all you get, because I gotta move to the next customer. I gotta go, right? Or you could take the approach of, I would rather have fewer customers that are more long-term. And maybe then my customers would then help me grow, right? Because then they'll talk to their friends, right? And I'll go that approach, right? So there's different ways of making the system sustainable. And I think being clear about what are the values driving it? What's the value proposition? And then this is kind of the way that as a community we've chosen to operate. And it may not solve everyone, right? Might not make everyone happy, right? Some people are very much like, I need the answer and I need it right now. And and if it's not here by yesterday, then I'm pissed off. It's like, okay, dude, like, I get that you work like that, and that's fantastic. And I can talk as fast as anybody. But, you know, if you really want to work in this community, you really want the value that you think that, you know, that you're expecting, you're going to have to stop for a second. Right? You're just going to have to, boop. So yeah.
And I wonder also though, like, and Mike, you're on, I don't know if you're listening, but I'd be curious of your perspective on, like, one of the things that we've struggled with is how to transition from sort of project-based funding, project-based thinking into more sustainable, like market-based funding and thinking. And even though this is in some sense very project-based, it's one group at a time, it's one set of features at a time. What I like about it is, every time you're taking a step forward, you're taking a good step because you had validation on every single step. And so in a sense, even though it takes a little longer, after 5 or 6 steps, what you have should work for a pretty broad section of the population because you brought people along with you every step of the way. And so, that's one of my hopes also with this. I don't know, Mike, if you want to speak to that or anything else that.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
Space. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. I mean, you start thinking more about, instead of projects, you start thinking about processes. And if you're setting up this process, then you're right, then you can apply it. And it becomes part of sort of like your working model. And
Mhm.
regardless of the project, right? It's kind of the way you approach it. That does lead to I think a better sustainability model rather than jumping from project to project, which is where everybody starts, right?
Yeah,
You're kind of like, yeah, there's a need out there. Let's just start with this project, and then we'll do that one, and that one. And pretty soon you're going, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. In order to scale this, we need some processes behind it. And then you sort of step back and have more of a market perspective behind what you're doing, because you are right that, I mean, the downside and the upside, like the sad part and the good part is that many communities are very unhappy with their
Mhm.
ag tech, which is kind of a bummer. Like, okay, I don't want people being unhappy, but this also means there's an opportunity.
Right.
There's clearly a large need that is going unmet, right?
Yeah.
And so that means that is an opportunity, right? And that if you have something, a reasonable process and a value proposition, then the market is there, right?
Yeah.
There clearly is a demand.
I think,
So-
just one more thing, and then I don't know if Stuart or Juliet, I mean, some of the other folks I know on the call want to speak to, but, and this kind of relates to GOAT, and the broader community is like, if we get people who have expertise in this process, then like the tool set that we all have broadly as an open source developers is getting evaluated against real needs on a consistent basis, right? Like, I don't know every tool out there. Like UNL, I know you guys have some tools I don't know enough detail about, that when I'm sitting down and I'm hearing what the issues are, that I can bring that to the table. The better we do as a community of clarifying what we have available, and the more people who are doing this process among more groups of people, that's like there's a multiplier effect there in both ways. Because I can come back to you as a tool developer and go like, listen, like I've talked to 7 people now who need your tool, except you don't do A, B, and C, or God, your pricing model makes no sense, or whatever, you know what I mean? Or like
Right,
the
right.
button didn't work on the website, and then
Yeah.
and vice versa. So the more we can organize, I think, and then the more people can be doing this. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll
No,
get
I
through the
often
end of
have,
it.
yeah, I often have conversations where by halfway through the conversation, I'm like, I don't actually know anything, but I certainly know a lot of people who know stuff. And so many times I'm like, oh, I understand exactly what your problem is. This is the person you need to go talk to. I know they'll be able to help you, right? And that is the value. That's the multiplier effect, right? That's the value of the community, right? Is fortunately nobody's expecting me to have the answers, right? But they know if I don't know, I probably know someone who does know, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
I don't know if Juliet or Stuart, if you
Juliet
guys
or
have, yeah. Those are the people I know.
anyone else?
Sorry.
Mhm.
So did you want us to like respond to something specific, or may I ask a question?
We're just yakking. So
questions?
Okay,
I'm
cool.
just trying to hold space since we're both talkers, Jennifer.
No, I appreciate that. Okay, so you've learned a lot about shared and divergent needs for several different kinds of ag organizations, right? is there a way, and it's amazing, I'm so glad that I just happened to see your message of publicizing this, because I would never, I don't think I would have ever have learned about some of the things that you discovered.
Even though we talk every day.
Even though we talk all the time. And so I'm wondering if there is like a plan or a mechanism by which you can make this kind of information that you shared today public, and do so in a way that doesn't infringe upon the privacy of the folks that you've engaged on this work on. But is there any plans to make like a synthesis and like make a RSI blog post or anything like that?
Yeah, we're gonna do a report at the end. I did tell everybody up front, not in a IRB level way, but I said, that we'll review all this at the end to make sure that they're comfortable with the final product being released. So they all know that. And then, yeah, we'll do a report. And I think some of these things like, like the base row stuff, like none of it's rocket science, but sometimes just process things and can simplify other people engaging it. So definitely we'll have a final report, and I'll definitely make as much of it public as people are willing to make public, or just de-identify things and make copies.
Mm.
Yep. So,
Awesome. And then another thing I was wanting to kind of touch point on was this idea of funding shared feature requests and how that was effective, but there was an issue around being able to deliver on time. And sometimes that's not even just deliver on time, but deliver on budget. What's, I guess, some lessons learned in that? And would you, because you don't want to, you kind of want to get it, you kind of want to nail it on the head the first time, right?
yeah.
But which is difficult to do, and arguably impossible to do, without having not already done it before. And so what are some precautions, and like next steps you'd consider taking to kind of improve on that next time around?
Yeah. I think lining up all your resources ahead of time with high confidence, and backups, in terms of, well, we need a developer, we need someone to do the needs assessments, and we need someone to, report back out and keep in touch, and like those roles. If you just have one person in each of those roles and you have no backups, it's the classic somebody got run over by a truck problem.
So would you say that you would hope that the folks who are fulfilling those roles could fulfill multiple if needed, or just
that you have alternatives to those people? Yeah, I think so. And it's for the reason that you described, which is everybody who's done software work in the past knows that things go long, things go wrong. You don't actually understand everything completely up front, even if you try really hard. All the normal stuff, if you've done it. Doesn't mean you should be late all the time, but it means that you understand that. But producers have never done that. And so and actually, I have to say, I didn't actually find this. They were all very nice about things being delivered late. But my expectation is that that would not hold for everyone, because they haven't gone through this, and you probably will burn some bridges. So I think you have to be just extra cautious about ensuring you have all the things, the resources, the time, that you're not overpromising. And also that you think all the way to delivery. That was actually mostly our failures. We thought about the process, and it's cool, we got it deployed in a repo, but these folks don't have, in our case, FarmOS instances set up, or where are they going to set them up? Well, they're going to set them up over here. Well, can we actually use this repo over there in these functions? Well, actually we can't yet. There's good reasons why, but we didn't think about that. And so it was there was a whole section of the getting to the actual application finished, we under scoped for, honestly. So yeah, probably a lot.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so that release to public part is a critical step. Yeah, because you're right, we're used to being able to work in development environments and just
Yeah.
kind of build tools for ourselves, so to speak, right? It's different in this case.
And training people how to use it, right?
Mhm.
Like the JD Ops integration was a good example of like, well, I could push the button and all the John Deere equipment and stuff came over into Farm OS and I could see it all and that's great. But then you're like, well, now what am I going to do with that? How does that relate to the rest of my farm
Yeah.
processes?
Mm.
Like I wanted it to be a backup, but now that I have it, users also don't think to the end. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah, that's right. So
Mhm.
you'd have to
Mhm.
basically release it with a standard operating procedure,
Yeah.
or like, a
Well,
template for one.
right. Or just take the time and have a person who's going to sit down for 5 or 6 hours. That I'm increasingly going in that direction that um, you just have to have a customer success person who's
Mhm.
just like spending the time with each producer by producer. Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
think that's the key. I think
Mhm.
there is when when normal people have problems with their plumbing or problems with their electrical system, they don't just, dive right in and make the repairs themselves. They bring in a specialist, either because they don't have the specialized knowledge or they don't have the time and realize,
The
it's better
equipment.
to have somebody else do it. And so I think that there needs to be an emerging class of professional that addresses the technology issues and kind of walks down this path of technology with the producer
100%.
and helping them kind of sort out their technology needs and their data integration needs and so forth. Apologize that I have a hard stop here in a couple of minutes, but I think this is fantastic. And there is in ISO TC 347, which is the Data Driven Agri-Food Systems, there is a new advisory group being created having to do with stakeholder engagement, where some of your presentation and materials here might be a really good thing to expose that group to. So expect to hear from me. I'll reach out to you, Greg, about that when that group schedules their first meeting. It is run by a guy out of New Zealand. So it'll probably be an hour evening, most
Right.
likely. But
at least we'll get to listen to an interesting accent. So that's
indeed, and he's
Yeah.
a delightful chap. I must bounce, but thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you for this presentation. It was fantastic.
Yeah. One last quick thought. You can hand out, but just for everybody else, like, imagine those two things. We just talked about there's a need for someone to do this detailed needs assessment, which is very much
Mhm.
farmer facing and trust building. And I 100% agree with Stuart. There's a need actually for a whole new technology support class.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they have very similar and overlapping skills, I would argue, and they're also both have to create trusted relationships with individual groups of farms. I mean, I really think that there's a whole opportunity there, and I think the opportunity is not another person that a farmer has to pay, but the opportunity is a person who's actually saving the farm time and money in the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would
Yeah,
almost,
it's very much.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Juliet. No, you're fine. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, that reminds me a little bit about kind of the roles that I feel like Amber and I will play when we tag team a needs assessment together, right? And also tabling at like goat conferences where I might be more inclined to kind of pull those needs out to inform design of a system, whereas she is bringing it back and framing it framing the context and of appropriate use in their system. And so that's really a really
Yeah.
neat kind of like dichotomy to hear laid out here.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, Mike made a comment that he wonders if extension can play a role, and I agree that that's part of why, the land grant universities are putting a lot of emphasis on training extension personnel to be able to have these conversations, at least to the level of listening to producers about what are their
Mhm.
technology challenges, not with the expectation that they're just going to solve it right there on the ground, but in the same way that they engage with producers about concerns about their production systems, concerns about what are their farm management practices, how do they do pest control, those kinds of things that the
Right.
extension people are well trained to handle in the same way that, could play a role in the technology space. But it does, it just takes a different level of training and different skill set to
Yeah.
do it. But it's very much in that model of the way extension works with ag producers.
It's there could be some interesting opportunities there for sure for like
Yeah.
extension-based training, but I think we kind of have to get our act together better first. You'd
Mhm.
want to really bring something that felt high confidence, ready to roll, with the support. I think CAF is another one. I think before I would even go to extension, I would go to CAF
Mhm.
because they're already doing this reach out. They're an independent organization. They have more flexibility
Yeah.
internally to make changes. But yeah, I think it's all good points. So
No, that's a good point. I mean, we've had similar pains in the statistics world where for many, many years, decades, we've had people who specialize in consulting, statistical consulting.
mhm.
They have a different skill set, right? That you learn how to sit down with people with data problems. I have a hypothesis I need to answer. I have no idea what to do. I don't know what data to collect. And just being able to listen, like you were saying, Greg, in the beginning, it was so important just to sit and listen. And a lot of things, they learn a lot of techniques for, getting good information and framing the challenge from the beginning, which is like when you
Mhm.
first sit down with a client, you're like, okay, just tell me about what you're doing. And
Mhm.
just set the stage, right? Tell me what's going on, right? And then at the end of the first meeting, you're like, okay, I'm gonna synthesize everything you've said, right? And then we're gonna meet again. And I'm gonna come back with some questions. And then at some
Yeah.
point, we'll come to a shared understanding of what the issue is, and then we can think about what the solution is gonna be, right? But it is a specific, different skill set that most statisticians are just like, nope, I don't do that. I don't know how,
Yeah.
I went into math stuff because I don't like to work with people. Sorry.
Right,
It's
right.
not me.
I don't know how to do it. I don't want to do it. Somebody else should do
Exactly.
it. Yeah, that's true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Um, and I really appreciate your time and your input. As I said, we'll make the recording available to the community through the webpage. And this is fantastic. I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Ditto. And
Yeah,
thank you, Devin. Thanks
likewise.
for the
Thank you.
conversation. Yeah,
Absolutely. It was great. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.